Mara Holt reached Coyote Wells with dust in her wedding veil, $1 in her glove, and the sound of Horace Pike's wagon still hunting the road behind her. The noon stage had not even stopped rolling when she jumped down at the livery, gathered the torn hem of her ivory dress in one hand, and looked across the yard for the first man who did not look owned. She found him by the water trough. Caleb Rusk stood with a bridle over one shoulder and a scar running pale from his left eyebrow into his hair. He was 35, sun-browned, broad through the chest, and still enough that even the horses seemed to lower their heads around him. The livery boys gave him room. So did the men on the chapel steps. Mara crossed the yard before fear could make her polite. "Sir," she said, and held out the dollar. "I need to hire you as my husband for 1 hour." The stage driver stopped tying luggage. 2 chapel women froze on the steps. Every eye in Coyote Wells saw the torn veil before anyone saw the woman under it. The livery went quiet in the way a town goes quiet when it hopes for shame but wants someone else to name it. Caleb looked at the coin, then at her face. "Are you hurt?" "Not yet." Behind her the road still carried wagon dust. Horace Pike was not a memory, he was distance closing. That answer changed his eyes, not softer, sharper. She forced her hand steady. "My name is Mara Holt. I am 29 years old. I left a chapel in Silver Lark this morning because the man waiting there said my father's debt made me his. He will be here before sundown. If I am already married when he arrives, he cannot put me in his wagon without making witnesses." "A hired husband is still a husband," said Mr. Doane from the livery door, with a smile he would not have worn if Horace Pike had been standing there. Mara kept her hand out. "Then I need one who can be hired to stand still and do nothing worse." Caleb did not smile. He took the dollar, but he held it flat in his palm as if it were evidence against the whole street. "1 hour will not hold a determined man," he said. "It may hold him long enough for the east stage." "And if the stage does not take you?" For the first time since she had run from Silver Lark, Mara had no answer ready. Caleb looked toward the little white chapel at the end of the freight street. Its doors stood open and the bell rope hung motionless in the heat. "I will stand beside you," he said, "but not as a lie a man can twist later. If there is a ceremony, it is in daylight, door open, you speak for yourself. No one says obey. No one says I bought you. 30 days only unless you renew it with your own mouth. I sleep in my tack room. You keep the paper that ends it." The dollar trembled in his palm. Mara had expected greed, mockery, maybe a bargain that made her choose between 2 cages. She had not expected rules that gave her a way out before she stepped in. "Why would you risk that?" she asked. His gaze flicked to the chapel, and a shadow crossed the scar at his brow. "Because I have watched men use a door as a trap," he said, "and because you asked before you were taken." The preacher, Mr. Elam, looked sick when Caleb led her into the chapel. He had married half the county and buried the other half, but his hands shook when Caleb gave him the dollar. "Put it in the poor box," Caleb said. "It is not bride price." Mara heard someone breathe hard behind her. 3 town women stood in the doorway. 2 teamsters lingered by the hitch rail. Mr. Doane pretended not to listen and listened with his whole face. Preacher Elam opened his little book. "Caleb, you have not entered this chapel since Isaac's burial. I know where I am. And you know what folks will say." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Folks have been saying it for 7 years. They can add 1 more sentence." Mara looked at him then, really looked. The scar was not the only old wound on him. His left hand flexed against his coat as if it remembered holding something it had failed to save. The preacher turned to Mara. "Miss Holt, is this your wish?" Horace Pike would have answered for her. Her father, when he was drunk on shame and promises, would have answered for her. Her cousin Nettie would have explained what was practical until there was no room left for what was true. Mara lifted her chin. "It is my free wish to enter a 30-day marriage for public protection," she said. "Mr. Rusk has made no claim on my body, my wages, my trunk, or my road. I will keep the paper that ends it." A murmur moved through the doorway. Caleb stood half a step away, not touching her sleeve. When the preacher asked him, he answered in the same plain voice. I agree to stand as husband in name and protection only until she chooses otherwise. It was not a wedding any girl in Silver Lark would have dreamed over. There were no flowers except dust-yellow weeds in a chipped jar. The groom did not take her hand. The bride wore a torn veil and watched the road through the chapel door. But when the preacher finished, Caleb stepped aside so Mara could be the first one out. Horace Pike arrived before the bell stopped trembling. His wagon came fast enough to throw grit against the chapel wall. He was 43, narrow-faced, clean-shaven, and dressed in a black coat too fine for the road. Behind him sat Mara's cousin Nettie, pale under a brown bonnet, with both hands folded over a reticule Mara recognized at once. It was the one Nettie used to hold store receipts. Horace looked at Mara's veil, then at Caleb. That paper is void, he said. Preacher Elam closed his book. It is entered. Entered under fraud. She is promised against a debt. Mara felt the old shame rise like fever. Her father had died owing money for seed, medicine, and bad seasons. Horace had bought the notes and then begun calling them promises. Caleb did not move closer. He did not need to. Debt cannot speak vows, he said. Horace smiled at him. Rusk, your hay contract crosses my account at the freight office. Your ranch note sits one signature from sale. I would choose my sermons carefully. The street watched Caleb's face for fear. Mara saw the smallest change there, a private calculation of loss. Hay meant winter feed. The ranch note meant land. Horace had not brought a pistol. He had brought the town's hunger. Caleb turned to Mara. My wagon is at the side rail. If you choose the east stage now, I will get you onto it. Horace's smile sharpened. He thought that was retreat. Mara looked at the wagon, then at Nettie. Did you tell him which stage I took? Nettie's fingers closed around the receipt reticule so tightly the brown cloth wrinkled. Mara had seen that grip before, whenever money mattered more than mercy. Nettie's mouth opened and closed. That was answer enough. I am not leaving in his dust, Mara said. Caleb nodded once. Then we go home by the north road. Horace called after them. You have until morning before every teamster in Coyote Wells knows better than to haul for a thief of brides. Caleb helped Mara into his wagon without touching more than the step. He climbed up beside her, leaving a foot of daylight between them. The whole street watched them leave. Mara kept her eyes forward until the chapel disappeared. Rusk Ranch sat 3 miles north where the grass thinned into gray-green scrub and a windmill turned lazily over a wooden tank. The house was smaller than Mara expected, with a tack room built onto the barn and a kitchen door polished by use. Nothing about it looked rich. Nothing about it looked careless. Caleb stopped at the yard gate. House has 2 rooms, he said. You take the back room, I take the tack room, Mrs. Vale can come at supper if you want a woman witness. I have had enough women watching me for other people, Mara said, more sharply than she meant. He accepted it without offense. Then the door stays yours. I will knock from the yard. And work. If you want wages, there is pump leather to cut, mending to do, and a windmill brake that hates me. The windmill creaked overhead. Mara looked up despite herself. That brake does not hate you, she said. The pawl is biting crooked. For the first time, Caleb almost smiled. You know mills. My father ran Holt Station before he ran it into debt. I kept our pump alive with boot leather and prayer. I pay cash on Saturdays. Pay on paper tonight, she said. Cash when you have it. He went to the barn and came back with a little account book. In the yard, while the wind moved her torn veil against her cheek, Caleb wrote her name. Mara Holt Rusk, pump and windmill work, fair wage, no debt against her. He handed her the pencil. Add what I missed. She wrote exit paper held by Mara. Then she took the back room and locked the door from inside, not because she feared him, but because a lock that obeyed her was a language she had missed. The next morning, Caleb knocked from the yard with coffee and a folded paper on the tray. He set both on the step and backed away before she opened. Mr. Elam will sign the ending paper whenever you ask, he said. I wrote it plain. Mara unfolded it with one hand still on the door. It said she could leave the marriage with notice spoken before 2 witnesses, no payment owed, no property claimed, no pursuit made. Her throat tightened in a way she did not trust. A man could write kind words and ignore them, she said. He could. Then why write them? So you can hold me against them before I become that man. That was the second safety he gave her, not a vow but a way to accuse him if he broke one. By noon she was on a stool under the windmill, sleeves pinned back, wedding gloves laid beside her, hair braided under a plain kerchief Caleb had found in a drawer. The brake pawl was worn thin, and the leather washers in the pump had cracked from dry heat. Caleb stood below, passing tools up only when she asked. Most men climb up after 3 minutes of watching, she said. Most men like falling. You trust me. I trust the pawl more when your hand is on it. It was not romance, it was better that day. It was room to be useful without being owned for usefulness. On the 3rd morning, Nettie came alone to the ranch gate. Mara saw the brown bonnet first and went cold. Caleb was mending harness near the barn. He stood, but he did not speak for her. Nettie gripped the gate rail. Mara, come home before this becomes uglier. Home was the place you told him to find me. Nettie's face folded. She was 46 and had raised Mara after Mara's mother died, but raising had not always meant shelter. Sometimes it had meant keeping accounts of bread and calling them love. Horace holds my store credit, Nettie said. If he calls it due, I lose everything. The reticule hung from Nettie's wrist like a small, locked account. Mara looked at it once and felt an old suspicion lift its head. So you gave him me. I gave him a road. I thought he would talk sense into you. Mara laughed once. It hurt. Sense is what people call a cage when they have the key. Nettie looked at Caleb. You do not know what she owes. Caleb's voice stayed even. I know she did not borrow herself. That sentence did what comfort could not. It put the dead outside Mara's skin. Nettie began to cry, but Mara had learned that tears could be a curtain. She did not step toward them. Did my father leave wages with you from Holt Station? Mara asked. Nettie went still. Mara had not known until that second. She had only suspected, a small bitter seed from years of being told there was never enough. How much? Mara asked. Not enough to matter now. Then bring it when it matters. Nettie left with dust around her skirt and no forgiveness behind her. That afternoon, Pike made his middle move. The leather order Caleb needed for the windmill did not arrive. The teamster who was meant to bring it rode past the ranch road with his eyes fixed ahead. At sunset, Mr. Doan's boy brought a note nailed to a crate lid. Rusk note purchased by H. Pike. Payment review at Coyote Wells office. Freight and livery credit suspended pending conduct. Caleb read it once. Mara watched the scar at his brow pale. Pike had not bought one paper. He had bought the road, the leather order, the livery stalls, the hay contract, and every frightened man between them. What does it cost you? She asked. Hay contract, winter feed, maybe the north pasture if he presses hard. Because of me. Because of him. You could still put me on the stage. He looked toward the road. I can hitch by moonrise, I will not call it pudding. There it was, the safe path offered cleanly. Mara went into the back room and lifted the little bundle she had saved from Silver Lark. Her mother's wedding gloves lay inside, soft cream kid leather, useless for work and precious because no one had managed to turn them into debt. Mara carried them to the windmill. Caleb followed only to the yard. Those are not pump leather, he said. They are now. But Mara. She heard the protest in his voice and something else under it. Not command. Grief for what the choice cost. If I run tonight, he learns any woman can be moved by cutting off the road, she said. If the windmill turns tomorrow, the town learns his credit is not the only water. She cut the first glove across the palm. The sound was small. It changed everything. They worked by lantern until the moon rose white over the tank. Caleb held the lamp while Mara cut washers, soaked them, and climbed with her dress tied back from the gears. Once the brake slipped and tore skin from her knuckle. Caleb moved under her with both hands lifted and stopped himself from climbing. "Say if you need me," he called. "I need you to stay where I put you." He did. Near dawn the pump caught. Water struck the inside of the tank in 3 hollow beats, then ran in a steady stream that made the horses lift their heads. The hired boy stopped at the barn door with a halter in his hand. He had seen Pike's note. Now he saw water run without Pike's name on it. Mara laughed before she knew she would. Caleb looked up at her like the sound itself had entered a locked room. For 1 hour, Coyote Wells seemed far away. It did not stay away. At breakfast, Caleb found the north pasture gate hanging open. The chain had not broken. Someone had lifted it and left it where the wind could slap iron against wood all night. 2 of his steers had wandered into the wash, and one had cut its flank on mesquite. Caleb said nothing when he saw it, but Mara saw the way his hand closed around the gate chain. "Pike?" she asked, "or a man hoping Pike will remember him kindly?" She waited for him to curse. He did not. He led the injured steer back, washed the cut with boiled water, and sent his hired boy toward the ridge to check the rest of the fence. The boy was 17 and scared enough to look 12, though old enough for ranch work and no part of the marriage story. Caleb gave him the gentlest horse and a clear order to come back before noon. Mara stood at the open gate with the ending paper in her apron pocket. The gate had been meant as a message. Pike could touch fence, freight, water, credit, and road. He could make Caleb pay for standing beside her without ever laying a hand on her. The open chain was not damage. It was handwriting. Pike had signed the fence without coming near the house. That was the first moment she nearly took the stage ticket. Caleb must have seen it. He stopped beside the gate but left the latch to her. "If you leave because you choose the road, I will harness the wagon," he said. If you leave because he shook a chain, he learns exactly how hard to shake the next one. Mara looked toward the windmill. The new glove leather was dark with water and holding. "Then we give him something heavier to shake." She went to the yard, pulled the freight station measuring stick from her trunk, and marked the trough boards in pencil so every bucket and barrel could be counted without Pike's ledger. Caleb watched her make the marks. Then he brought his account book and opened to a clean page. "Water account?" he asked. "Work account," she said. "Water first, fence after. Nobody drinks free from fear and nobody pays through him." He wrote the words exactly as she said them. Then Pike arrived with 3 wagons, Preacher Elam, Nettie, Mr. Doan, and half the town strung behind him by fear and curiosity. Caleb had expected him. Mara knew because the East Stage ticket lay on the kitchen table beside the ending paper, both signed, both waiting for her hand. "Before you step outside," Caleb said, "take them." Mara stared at the papers. "Now." "Especially now." Outside, Pike's voice carried, "Rusk, bring out the woman and save your note." The East Stage ticket and ending paper lay on the kitchen table behind her. For once, leaving and staying were both visible choices. Caleb did not look at the door. He looked at Mara. "If you walk to the East Stage, I will stand in the street until it leaves. If you stay, I will not be the reason." She took the ticket. She took the ending paper. He stepped out first and moved to the far side of the yard, away from the gate. Pike saw the distance and smiled. Trouble in the honeymoon house. Mara walked out alone. The wind caught her torn veil, which she had tied at her throat that morning to keep dust out of her collar. She held the stage ticket where everyone could see it, not as proof for Pike, but as proof for herself. "I can leave," she said. Pike laughed. "You can ride in my wagon." "No." He turned to Mr. Doan. "Hitch my second team, we take her now." Doan looked at Pike, then at Caleb, then at Mara's bloody knuckle wrapped in a strip of cream glove. "Your account is good," Pike snapped. Doan swallowed. "My horses are not for hauling a woman who said no." Doan's livery boys looked at one another, then let Pike's spare traces fall into the dust. The first crack in Pike's power made no sound, but everyone heard it. Pike swung toward Preacher Elam. "Void this farce." The preacher's face was gray. "I heard her consent. I hear her refusal now." "You hear what I pay you to hear." Preacher Elam held the marriage book tighter, not like law now, but like a thing he should have protected sooner. Mara stepped past them toward the windmill. The brake lever waited above the pump, patched with her mother's glove leather. Caleb stood 10 yards away, hands empty, body rigid with the effort of not helping. Pike followed. "If you touch that wheel, I call Rusk's note due." "You already did," Mara said. "Then I take his pasture." She put one hand on the lever. Nettie made a small sound. "Mara, please." Mara looked at her cousin. "If you want me to listen, bring what you kept." Nettie's face crumpled, but this time she opened the reticule. She drew out a folded packet of bills, worn soft at the edges, and held it where the town could see. "Her father left wages from Holt Station," Nettie said. "I kept them because Horace said a girl with money would run." No one spoke. One teamster looked at Mara's torn veil, then at the bills, and took his hand off Pike's wagon rail. Pike lunged for the packet. Caleb took one step, then stopped when Mara lifted her other hand. She did not need him to save the money. Doan did it. The liveryman caught Pike's wrist in both hands and held it away from Nettie. "No," Doan said, and the word seemed to surprise him into standing straighter. The teamsters shifted. One by one they set down the traces they had been holding. Mara pulled the brake lever. For a breath, nothing happened. Then the windmill turned with a long metal groan. The patched pump caught. Water rushed into the tank, clear and loud, spilling through the side trough and down into the dry channel that ran toward the freight street. The sound crossed the yard louder than Pike's credit. Men who had been waiting for his order turned their faces toward the trough instead. Every horse in the yard lifted its head. Every person watched the water move. Mara held the lever until the wheels settled into rhythm. "This is not Rusk charity," she said. "This is work. I know how to keep it turning. Any wagon needing water can pay in coin or labor, not Pike credit. Any woman needing the east stage can stand in this yard until it comes." Pike's face had gone red under the fine brim of his hat. "You are my promised bride." Mara held up the ticket and the ending paper. "I was free to leave before I chose to stay." It was the simplest truth in the yard, and because it was simple, Pike could not find a handle on it. Caleb had not moved. He stood by the fence with his hands open, letting the town see the space between them. Mara turned to him then. "Caleb Rusk," she said, loud enough for the chapel preacher, the livery, Nettie, and the teamsters, "I choose to keep the 30 days. After that, if you still wish to ask me anything, ask me at a gate I can close." His face changed, not into triumph, into relief so sharp it looked almost like pain. "I can wait at that gate," he said. Pike turned on the crowd. "Anyone who waters here loses my freight credit." A second teamster set down his trace. A third folded Pike's freight notice and put it in Caleb's account book instead of Pike's pocket. The first teamster laughed. It was not brave laughter. It was exhausted laughter, the kind that comes when a chain turns out to be rope. "Then I will haul for coin," he said. Mrs. Larkin from the chapel doorway stepped forward with 2 buckets. "I have soap, beans, and 2 sons who can mend fence for water." Mrs. Larkin looked at the water, then at Pike, and walked toward the trough with her buckets. Doan released Pike's wrist and went to unbuckle Pike's second team from the wagon. "My livery settles accounts on Saturday. Bring coin." Preacher Elam removed the little marriage entry book from under his arm. He did not hold it up like a judge. He held it against his own chest like a man ashamed he had nearly sold his courage. "No void," he said. "No forced return." Nettie crossed the yard to Mara with the packet of wages. She stopped at arm's length. Nettie's empty reticule hung open at her wrist, and for the first time it looked poorer than Mara's torn veil. "It is $118, Nettie said. "And my store credit is gone when he leaves." "Yes," Mara said. Nettie flinched. Maybe she had expected mercy to come cheap. Mara took the packet. "You can earn trade at the pump like anyone else." It was not forgiveness. It was a door with work on the other side. Pike climbed into his wagon alone. No teamster drove him. No livery boy ran ahead. He had to gather his own reins while the whole yard watched the man who had owned their hunger discover that hunger could organize. Before he left, he pointed at Caleb. "The note is still mine." Mara stepped to the trough where the water ran steady and lifted the soaked strip of glove leather from the overflow. "Then bring it Saturday," she said, "and stand in line." Pike looked from her to the teamsters, to Doan, to Nettie holding her empty reticule, to Caleb standing back with no hand on his bride. What he lost that day was not all his money. It was the quick obedience that had made his money feel like law. Pike left with his second wagon empty, his spare traces in the dust, his freight notice folded into Caleb's account book, his teamster's talking coin, and his fastest weapon, quick obedience, gone. The damage he left behind had to be counted before anyone could pretend the story was finished. Caleb's hired boy rode in from the ridge with a torn sleeve and news that 2 more pasture chains had been lifted. Doan found a livery notice nailed to his own wall, threatening to pull Pike freight from his stalls. Mrs. Larkin admitted her oldest son owed Pike for a winter doctor bill. The teamster who had laughed first showed a receipt that made his hands shake. It was not bravery that filled the yard after Pike left. It was arithmetic. Mara took Caleb's account book and set it on an upturned crate by the trough. "Bring every Pike account that touches water or freight," she said. "Not for a court, for work." "You a banker now?" one man asked. "No," Mara said. "That is why you may survive me." The laugh that followed was small, but it loosened shoulders. Men and women came forward with papers, slates, memory, and shame. Mara did not forgive debts. She sorted them into what Pike could lawfully demand, what he had inflated with fees no one had challenged, and what could be met by hauling, fence work, wash water, and pump maintenance before Saturday. Caleb stood beside the crate only when she asked him to lift it into shade. By late afternoon, Pike's note still existed, but it had company. 6 signed work pledges, 4 water shares, and Nettie's first payment marked against the wages she had kept. The town did not become good in one day. It became less a loan, which was harder for Pike to buy. The town did not cheer. Cheers would have made it too easy. Instead, people moved. Buckets came down. Harness was rehung. A teamster asked Mara where to set a brace under the trough. Mrs. Larkin rolled up her sleeves. Preacher Elam carried the poor box dollar from the chapel and placed it on the pump rail. "This belongs to the bargain," he said. Mara picked it up. For a moment she saw herself on the livery street, hand out, trying to buy 1 hour of not being taken. Then she put the dollar in Caleb's account book and wrote beside it, "First water credit, held for any woman needing passage." Caleb watched the pencil move. "That is your dollar," he said. "It bought me time. Now it can buy time again." By sunset, Pike's wagons were gone from Coyote Wells. His note on Caleb's ranch had not vanished, but it no longer stood alone. 3 teamsters had pledged hauling against it. Doan had put his livery account in writing without Pike's name on it. Nettie, pale and silent, had taken a broom to the chapel steps for Mrs. Larkin's water share, and nobody pretended that was equal to what she had done. Mara ate supper at the kitchen table with Caleb sitting on the porch outside the open door because that was where she asked him to sit. "You can come in," she said after the second cup of coffee. He looked through the doorway, not crossing the sill. "Because the town saw." "Because I said." Only then did he enter. They did not speak of love that night. Love, Mara thought, had been used too often as a ribbon around a bargain someone else tied. They spoke of leather orders, Saturday accounts, and how to deepen the overflow channel before the next dry spell. Caleb showed her where Isaac had carved his name under the table when they were boys. Mara told him how her mother used to patch pump leather with old boot tongues and call it making stubbornness useful. When the lamp burned low, Caleb rose first. "Tack room," he said. "I know." At the back room door, Mara took out the ending paper and read it once more. It did not hurt to read it now. It steadied her. The next morning she hitched the small dun mare herself and drove to the chapel before breakfast. Caleb rode behind at a distance that let any watcher know he was company, not guard. Coyote Wells looked different in morning light. Not kinder, more awake. Doan was sweeping his livery. Mrs. Larkin was arguing with a teamster about fence braces. Nettie sat on the chapel steps with red eyes and a ledger open, adding what she owed in work. Mara went inside alone. The poor box smelled of old pine and dust. She placed the unused East Stage ticket beneath the chapel lamp, waited with the silver dollar for passage. Then she wrote on a scrap of brown paper and tucked it under the edge. For the woman who needs the door open. The dollar that had hired 1 hour of protection now sat under the chapel lamp for the next woman who needed time before she needed permission. When she came out, Caleb was waiting by the ranch gate across the street. He had not tied it open. He had not leaned on it. He stood with both hands resting loose at his sides, leaving the latch untouched. Mara crossed the street while the town pretended not to watch. At the gate she paused with her fingers on the latch. 30 days, she said. 30 days, Caleb answered. And after that you ask at a gate I can close. Yes. Mara opened it herself, stepped through because she chose to, and left it wide enough for Caleb Rusk to enter only when she turned back and spoke his name.